Oh yeah, it's always very interesting to hear the origins of our panelists. Yeah, especially like once you're late in the career, it's awesome to connect where we started from. So thank you very much for that.
So why did I study medicine? I really don't know. I think it was partly without any pressure, just a family advice. I was lucky to have a few brothers who are physicians as well. So it was sort of a natural choice. But at the same time, I think it was an idea that perhaps our parents gave us to serve and to be kind and to be compassionate. And medicine was put right up there as a very compassionate job to do. So it was sort of a natural progress towards a good way to serve, yet having a profession that is going to give you what you're looking for, both spiritually perhaps and financially, and also self-satisfying. And I think it was just a natural progression. Never regretted it. Though I did dabble a little bit into law before I went into medicine. I'm happy I changed. So Bhakti Yoga, in the way I try to remember it, is the ability to serve as much as I can, and whether it's to serve the person or the spirit within that person. So I take it as in pediatrics, it's very simple because you see those great little kids that come in as babies and smiling at you. So it's very easy to see the beauty in them. However, in pediatrics, there is that 2 to 5%, which are very sad cases or very complex cases. And if anything, it gives us a opportunity to serve in different ways, because often you not only serve the child, but certainly serve the parents. And I find that as you get older, after 30 years of doing this, spirituality comes in the forefront. And sometimes parents of whether they are non-believers or believers, whether they are Buddhists or whether they're Christian, we all have the same message, and they all have the same love for the kids. So I find if I use their love for their kids as a crutch to show that, oh, this is important, or this is a way to go to serve better, it helps me a lot, right? Also, as Bhakti Yoga, it shows you humility, because again, after 30 years of doing it, I realize, and I'll say that to the medical students and residents here, you don't have to know everything at all times. And indeed, there'll be times in your life, in the next decades of practice, where you realize you're not indispensable. It's okay to ask for help, right? So humility comes in play as you go forward in medicine. Like, I don't know it all. And it will hit you when one of your patients passes on. It will hit you when you least suspect it. It will hit you when a patient or a parent shouts back at you and scolds you. It will hit you when somebody leaves your practice because you were a bad doctor. So humility helps in achieving bhakti better, because despite trying your best, you will still have people that put you back in place, right? So Bhakti Yoga is serving humility, and you learn that as you go through practice. That's what I see, yeah. Right? That's where I come from. Yeah.
Yeah, let's have Dr. Patel. Would you like to provide your opening statement?
Sure. So, I mean, just in simple words, back before, probably in high school and even before, I've always had this real fascination with the human body, physiology, and anything related to it. And then when I combine that with really having a love for children and wanting to make a difference, it was really a natural fit for myself. But I really feel that there's so many diverse ways that you can make a difference as a physician in medicine. But I would say it's not until you get into medical school and residency and real world practice that you really understand how you can make that difference and how that unfolds. I think that is something, like, we have an idea, but how that unfolds sometimes tends to be quite different. And so that's just a little bit of why I chose to start the journey. Sure. So I think that's a very simple way that I think about Bhakti, but also in the context of medicine, and really anything that we're doing, is it's not about what we're doing, but it's more about how we do it, right? And so how we do something really gets to our intention that we bring to everything that we do. And I think that's really important because, I mean, just speaking to both what Dr. Indra and Patrick were saying, is that medicine, and both medicine, when medicine, I'm referring to the patients we deal with, but also the people that we work with, and looking beyond just the physical and mental health needs of our patients and colleagues, but really trying to connect with people at a heart level. Right now, I'm sure everyone knows, but medicine's being challenged. The field is being challenged in ways that it's never been before. And internally, externally, and even the values by which physicians, once upheld are, sometimes slowly kind of degrading. And one of my mentors, he said something that was really powerful that I've kept with me ever since. But, I think a great need in medicine speaks to what he was saying. He said that, the greatest act of compassion we can have in this world is to be a good example for others to follow. And that was really powerful because it meant that I had to do the work, myself, and then really try to, go as deep as I can to first, do the best I can for myself and work with myself, and then try to share with others. And what, Dr. Indra was saying is that spirit of service. I think when we, Bhakti in the context of medicine, if we bring that kindness and go that extra mile, sometimes, we'll see over time, and doesn't have the answer to all of the different problems and conditions and physical and mental challenges that are out there in the world. But if we can really bring our heart into everything we do, it leaves a positive impression on others that'll never be forgotten. So that's just a little bit of where I'm coming from, Bhakti, in the context of medicine. And then just to the last question of just a particular thing that I'm realizing at the stage of where I'm at with my job is that, I'm about 7 years into working, and I'm sure Dr. Indra might be the only one to relate to this, but after kind of the 5-year mark, you get comfortable with what you're doing, and that comfort can be a little bit alluring because you just, you settle in. I realized this kind of 2 years after starting to practice. So I've been, while I'm practicing, also trying to plan for my evolution, not only within the career, but just overall. And I think when you first start out your career, you're just so focused on learning and doing everything as best as you can. But then as you get more comfortable with things, you can start to think about, you can look at the field as a whole. You can think about yourself, how you want to be in it, how you want to live in, with your work, and live by a certain set of values.
Yeah, wow, that too, that great opening statement. Thank you very much. Would Dr. Tyagi, or sorry, Ravi, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure, no worries. So I think there was a couple of parts of this introduction that we were to touch on, and if I'm speaking too much, just let me know. But so the first part was why I chose medicine. So I was always interested sort of in innovation and technology and all that sort of stuff, which is why I did biomedical engineering as my major in undergrad. But at the same time, I didn't want to sacrifice patient interaction. I did some shadowing, and I really enjoyed everything that I saw. And so it sort of made sense to pursue medicine, because that way I would still get patient interaction, but at the same time, I could choose to pursue engineering and find ways to integrate that into my career. I think the second part is, what does Bhakti Yoga mean to me in the context of medicine? So to be completely transparent, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly it means to me, especially in the context of medicine. But I really try to see, and sometimes it's harder than others, but try to see my career in medicine as almost like a service. And in a lot of ways, it's very clear to make those connections. But medicine is austere, so it's definitely a sadhana. It's hard in a lot of ways. But my hope is that whatever skills, connections, and work that I do can be used to serve the temple and our community more, and hopefully create a stable enough, quote unquote, material life so I could dedicate more mental energy to service. Third part of the introduction, I think, was, what is something that only someone at your particular stage could tell you about the job? So I think especially early on in my medical training, I think one thing that I kind of wish I knew is how much work it is up front. And at times it can be sometimes a little bit discouraging early on in your career just because of, you know, how intense it can be. But I think as long as your motives are pure and you're going into medicine for the right reasons, it can be very fulfilling. I'm sure the other panelists have more perspective on this, and looking forward to hearing from them.
Interesting. Yeah. One pattern I found after talking to our panelists for a bit is that I think so much meaning gets added. Like, you know, for pre-medical students, it's just a career path. But you know, on the process of, you know, becoming who we are, we all come up with our own meanings, and it's just so great to hear that from our panel. So thank you very much. Yeah, would Brinda, would you like to go next?
Sure. So in terms of why medicine, I always knew I would be in a caretaking type of field. I grew up with like a really big family, a lot of cousins, and like my role was always taking care of people. So I was like, okay, like this is going to be my job, like from the time I was a kid. But as I grew older, I had a very philosophical type of bent. So my undergrad degree is actually in the humanities, and I was like kind of feeling this tension between being very intellectual and abstract and, you know, theorizing about things, and then feeling like this need to also want to interact with people and yeah, just serve in that way. So I think it was my first or like early second year of college, I read this book called When Breath Becomes Air. It's by Dr. Paul Kalanithi. He's a neurosurgeon who, during his medical training for neurosurgery, is diagnosed with lung cancer. So he's like reflecting on his life and his career. It's a really beautiful book, and he basically kind of goes through the same struggle. Like, he's very literary, and the bread and butter of medicine is listening to people coming into their lives at a juncture where they're really vulnerable, where they really need something, or at the very least, you know, yeah, at the very least, a time when you can really be there for people. So yeah, that kind of like changed my trajectory a little bit. In terms of how Bhakti yoga, even in the few months that I've been on rotations, like you see a lot of suffering, to put it bluntly, and like I think you see a lot of suffering, but also a lot of things are laid bare, like the reality of life. And I think that's really ripe for our spiritual practice, because if you're going into it with that reflective kind of lens to it kind of, yeah, I think it just exposes kind of the reality of the world, and gives a sense of urgency of why our spiritual practices are so important. So that's one thing that came to mind. And then in terms of what's something at your stage of training that only you can share about the job, I think I didn't realize just how much of your energy in medicine goes into logistics and communication and things like that. Like before, when I would imagine medicine, it was very like talking to patients and making the diagnosis and treatment. And there is, of course, that, but there's like this whole other infrastructure that sometimes can feel draining. So yeah, that's what I would say for the third question.
Wow, certainly. Thank you so much for that was lovely to hear. Yeah, absolutely. You're like I think medicine's this one career that requires like the most amount of skills in terms of interacting, as you're, you know, interacting with vulnerable patients, and, you know, just like breaking news, giving them like, you know, just helping diagnose them. It's also like I don't think we're trained in that aspect, you know, like in the formal education. We're not really trained on those skills, on how to interact with patients and develop like the emotional intelligence. So I think, you know, that's something you got to come up with your own, and that's where things like Bhakti yoga, spirituality, and having just a good mindset comes in. So you're absolutely right about that. Thank you. Patrick, would you like to give us your opening statement?
Yeah, for sure. So the reason why I pursued medicine or had a great interest in medicine was, I think, echoed by a lot of the previous panelists, but essentially having just a fascination over physiology and the human body, the desire to help others. And I think the other main thing is just how much medicine is problem solving. And, if you ever wanted to be a professional problem solver and be someone in patient lives to really help them and figure out a clear kind of path or course of action to really improve their quality of life, I think medicine is kind of one of the pinnacles of that kind of career. I'd be lying if I didn't say there was some influence from upbringing and parents, and definitely, my journey towards medicine is a long struggle between understanding external motives and internal motivations of what I want to do with my future. And I'm glad that in the end, I ended up where I am today. In terms of Bhakti Yoga and spirituality, I am sorry to say I am not a practitioner of Bhakti spirituality. I'm not very familiar with it. But I did a quick Google research. And from what I understand, for me, I think in a broader speaking of spirituality, I think, medicine and health is best practiced in a holistic approach. And there is great value in the understanding that healing involves the healing of the body and the healing of the mind. And for many people who practice spirituality, the healing of the spirit as well. And kind of that balance is what leads to, for many people in different cultures, better health, especially when you're talking about, psychiatry, which is the rotation that I'm on now. There's really big focus on that as well. And then, something that only someone in my level or particular stage in my training would understand. And I think this will be especially useful for someone in first year, is that right off the bat, you're always going to be hit with a lot of information, and it's going to be overwhelming. But the training for medical students and for residents is long because you aren't expected to know everything at the beginning. You're expected to learn and try to absorb as much information, but your capacity as a physician will come with the years of practice and experience that you have until you reach that stage.
Well, thank you so much. I really liked how you went into Bhakti Yoga, although you may not have as much experience. You did a great job of summarizing it. So thank you for that. And lastly, would Simran like to give their opening statement?
Sure. I decided to become a doctor pretty early on, but for very different reasons, I would say. I grew up in a country where healthcare was not really very easily provided. So it was more like vengeance. I was like, oh, I'll become a doctor and show you what a better doctor is type of thing as a child. But then as I grew up, I realized it's a little more complicated than that, and it involves a lot more service than that. And as I started getting involved in service activities, I started volunteering at the hospital. I actually realized I enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed my physiology classes very much. I enjoyed psychology classes very much, everything related to it. So it just seemed like a very fitting career. And so far it still does, 2 months into medical school, which is not very much. In terms of how Bhakti Yoga fits into medicine for me, well, I guess one of the principles that has been really coming into relevance is just understanding how much control and how much is not, how much is just, you just have to let go, and it's just not something you can change. So you just have to accept. Whereas for many reasons, if it's like something to do with me, or if it's something to do with the patient that I'm seeing due to lack of knowledge, lack of training, lack of resources, there's so many things that are out of our control. So I guess just finding the gap has been tough, but a very important principle of yoga. In terms of what I can tell you about medical school, so early on, I would just resonate with Patrick and Ravi's emotions. It's very overwhelming. I think I was also under a misconception because I always heard from senior medical students that, oh, no one fails medical school, don't worry about it, you'll manage. they give so much support and it was very uplifting, but I didn't realize that you still have to do a lot of work. So it is very overwhelming at first. So be prepared for a lot of work when you come in.
Oh yeah, it was lovely to hear how our childhood connects. Like now that you've made it to medical school, and now how you're connecting like with your perspective as a child, and then it's so lovely to see how that's transformed now in your stage of medical practice. One pattern that I've noticed is like our like in university for the pre-med students, our biggest stressors are like what could I do to get into med school, or what type of volunteering, what marks do I need. But I think once we start practicing medicine, we truly form like a bigger picture, and I think that stems off from like this backbone of spirituality and philosophy, and which can only be learned via discussions like this. Like I went did quite a bit of research from YouTube, but like the advice that I got was very superficial. I think one thing that I found really interesting here is like like the deeper, the philosophical, and the mindset of which we're in after practicing for this many years. It's just truly amazing to hear. So thank you very much. All right, so we'll move on to our discussion questions. So the first set is going to be for all panelists, and then we'll move into specifically for doctors and then residents and medical students. I think Akanksha is going to start with our first question. Would you like to take over?
Yep. Thank you, Patricia, and thank you everybody for so much insight. It was so awesome to hear everything to say, and I'm really excited for the rest of this event. So the first question that we have for all of our panelists, it's really like we want to see like what I guess your expectations were about medicine going in and what reality was really like. So what is the one biggest thing that you feel you got wrong about medicine? And so, yeah, I guess this would apply to, I guess, all of our panelists. So if you could maybe start in the order that we have been going in, that would be great. Thanks.
So that will be me. All right. So I think the biggest thing that I was taught a few years ago by somebody even older than me, who was also a pediatrician, he basically reminded me, you don't have to treat everyone at all times, and you don't have to know everything at all times. You do your best you can. And also realize that I'm not responsible for the health of all children of Northern Alberta. So sometimes as you become physicians and as you grow in your profession, as Dr. Patel said, once you go after that 5 years and you feel comfortable, you also start thinking, I can deal with every problem. As I progress in my career, I realized, no, you don't. You can't do it, and you have to ask for help. And even then, as a group of us, we still may not solve a diagnosis or a problem or manage a treatment well. So the bottom line is realize you're not indispensable. All right. So I think that's the biggest thing I've learned. And it's okay to say, I don't know. But it's also something you will learn to say to parents, I do not know. Please guide me. I think that's very, very important, especially in pediatrics.
Would Dr. Patel like to step in?
Sure. So one thing that I think I got wrong that I learned, as you all know, med school residency, it's a really long slog. Early mornings, late nights, preparing for presentations, doing research, you're trying to read to prepare for your patients in between the long days. And on top of that, you're trying to take care of yourself. You may be trying to be a friend, a child, a sibling, a mentor, you practice something. And so it's a lot to take on. And I alluded to at the beginning of my introduction that year that I spent in Ottawa, I couldn't finish it because I, in fact, burnt out that year. And one of the things that I would, tell everyone, and what I was naive about, was that there will be people to look after you and look out for you on the journey. And I will say one of the things, if everyone can just, the biggest takeaways that I had from my journey so far is that if you can develop the courage to set your own limits and boundaries. We're in a system right now that it's so strained that if you don't take what you need, no one's going to give it to you. And I was naive about that. And so I would tell everyone that it's really important to, as they always say when you're in an airplane, like you have to put on your oxygen mask first before you can put it on someone else. And the same goes for us as healthcare providers as well. And so developing that courage is not easy because we're in a position where we're subservient as med students, as residents. Your time is not your own. You're always trying to please others, and it can be hard. But that's my takeaway for everyone. It's something that I've feel that I learned along the way.
Thank you for that. And I think that this is something that we can already begin. For those of us here who are pre-meds, we can already begin trying to kind of foster and try and learn. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. Next, I guess I will move on to Ravi.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to echo some of the thoughts that Dr. Patel shared. I think one thing that I sort of minimized or undervalued was the importance of wellness in medical school. I think that's something I just sort of took for granted. Whenever we had lectures on wellness or whatever, like that was my time to just space out. And looking back, maybe lectures on wellness aren't the best way to promote wellness, but I think that's something that should not be minimized, especially in a career like medicine that's so time intensive, and it can be mentally exhausting, and all sorts of things. So I think it's really important to have really strong support systems in place, especially we're gonna pursue a career like medicine. And that's something that I'm not taking lightly, especially so early on in my career. I think it's important to prioritize that. And then from what I understand, and from what I've seen from the residents and attendings that I've worked with, the happiest people in medicine are the people who prioritize their own well-being. And so that's something that I definitely would hope to keep in mind moving forward.
Thank you so much for your thoughts there. I will move on to Brinda next.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same wavelength as Ravi and Dr. Patel. I think having finished around 6 months of rotations and the first 2 years of med school, I definitely overestimated how much I could take, and I definitely had a moment, a series of weeks last year where I just kind of exploded a little bit. And I think we can't overestimate, or we can't underestimate all the little things that make up the day-to-day of medicine. Some of them can be really, the emotional toll of them can be really draining. The pressure to come off a certain way, to come off as competent and knowledgeable and friendly and charming all at once, it can be a lot. And I think, I haven't, perfected the wellness and how to do that yet. I feel like I'm more in the eye of the storm, but I echo that that's definitely something I got wrong in the sense of not prioritizing it early enough.
Thank you for sharing. I will move on to Patrick next.
Yeah, kind of a two-parter for this. The first one's more of a joke one, but the joke one is that, you go from med school to clerkship, or first 2 years to clerkship. And one thing I got wrong was expecting it all to be medicine, but really medicine is only 30% of your job, and the other 70% is paperwork. But the other part is kind of jumping and expanding on what it's been said previously. I think one of the medicine attracts a certain type of people, a certain type of person, really high functioning, usually very independent, and usually having something to prove. And something that we always forget is that we should always ask for help, and then there's nothing wrong with asking for help. One of the mottos that I learned was, if you ask, you might get it. If you don't ask, you'll never get it. And I think that goes for, not just opportunities to, get into medicine and also in medicine, but also, when you're dealing with situations, when you're dealing with gaps in knowledge, when you're dealing with patients, always ask for help if you need it, because if you can get that help, you can also better help the patient that you're working with.
Thank you so much. Super important message, and I'm so glad that it was kind of re-emphasized with each of our panelists here. I'm sure we can all take something from those answers. Thank you so much, everybody.
I guess I'm pretty early on in my training. One thing I'll say is that I always knew there'll be a lot of information, but I didn't think I fully realized how much information there is to learn. Like even in 2 months, I feel like there's been so much information that's been thrown at us and I'm not retaining very much. So I guess that was one thing that I realized after getting in.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Simran. I guess Anki is coming handy now in med school. Yeah, so I guess I'll pass this on to Avash, who I believe will be asking our next question.
Thank you so much, Akanksha, for moderating that part of the event. Thank you so much to all the panelists for being here today. I can't thank you guys enough for your time. Today's Thanksgiving Day. You guys probably have better things to do, but thank you so much for being here. My question to the panelist is that, can you tell us about one situation where your practice, your research, or even your study has seriously threatened your understanding of spirituality? And how did you deal with that? And I want to start with Dr. Dhunnoo.
Right. I was looking at this question this afternoon, and there hasn't been much that threatened my belief in what I believe in spirituality. It's just more reading. So the more I read scriptures or books or texts on other than medicine, the answers comes to you. So maybe it's a fortunate career that we've chosen, that there are a lot more parallels that contradictory, practices. So I thought about it a lot, and I like to hear what others have faced, but it was pretty easy for me. And there are answers both ways, one supplement the other very well.
Thank you, Dr. Dhunnoo. I want to move on to Dr. Patel with the same question.
Yeah, it's interesting that Dr. Dhunnoo said that. I was going to say that in one sense, there's many experiences that have challenged many of us, but I couldn't identify one specific one. But I will say that there's an interesting model that I'll just share with everyone, that the wisdom texts in Bhakti, they talk about as a way to make decisions in life, or how to approach challenges. And it talks about having a kind of a 3-point system. One is having mentors, and I think when you have mentors, you can they really help kind of clear a lot of sometimes anxiety and fear that we have as we go through the different challenges that we have, people who are more experienced than us. That's the first piece. The second piece is having the company of like-minded friends. And in this case, it may even be like other seekers who are who have the same lifestyle or path that we have. And having that friendship is really important, because we all need a shoulder to lean on at times. And then the third element of the kind of that triad model is having some type of wisdom text that we can turn to help anchor us, that kind of give us like a beacon or a goal to strive for, and really help align us. So we take kind of that 3-point system of mentors, seekers and friends, as well as wisdom texts. Those three kind of align And when those three align, they really give you a template for really being able to handle any challenge that you may have, along your trajectory at any point in time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. I want to move on to Ravi with the same question.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, big picture, there hasn't really been like too many situations that I felt like threatened spiritually. I think there's been a couple like specific situations where I was, where it was a little bit confusing, I guess, to navigate, and I can just share those, I guess. One situation that, so part of medical school is, you do dissections, and, you work with cadavers, and you have to, do that sort of thing to learn anatomy. I think that was kind of challenging for me at first from a spiritual perspective, because I mean, it initially felt like wrong. It felt like we're, violating like a human body. It didn't feel correct. And then, I spoke about this with a couple of, spiritual mentors that I have, and they kind of like eased my mind, I guess, like when we were doing that. And, these people that you're working, the cadavers, these are people who've donated their body to help further science and help you save more people, and I think with that perspective, it kind of made it a little bit easier to do. But that was a situation that kind of put me at odds with some of my beliefs, I think. Maybe a second thing that I could think of is, so I'm really interested in research and innovation. That's sort of, a passion of mine, and part of the reason I went into medicine. And a lot of pharmacology and the devices that we tested are, done with like animal models. And I think that was another thing for me that was kind of hard to grasp, especially, as someone who really wants to go into the device space. It just always been challenging to feel like, another living entity has to suffer for a device to, be useful in humans. So that's something that I'm still trying to kind of reason through. But I guess those are two specific situations, very niche situations, I think, where I've kind of like been at odds. But as a whole, in terms of the clinical, like day-to-day stuff, I don't think I've really been like super challenged yet.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for sharing that with us. And I want to move on to Brinda with the same question.
Yeah, I think like everyone, I couldn't really think of a particular situation where my spirituality has been threatened. There were a couple, or like on the flip side, I do think there's a lot that strengthened or kind of fueled my curiosity. Like I remember, especially in first year, I guess all the pre-meds might experience this soon when you're learning about biochemistry and embryology. It's like, it's mind-blowing, and you're like, how, like, you really like, or at least I felt like more open to the idea that there must be a divine like intelligence kind of powering through this. Like when you learn about all the pathways and chemical reactions and everything that has to go right through your course of medicine, like I found that very inspiring, if anything. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Brinda. With the same question, I want to move on to Patrick.
Hi, yeah. So as someone who does not practice that much spirituality or had much of that in my life, I think the biggest struggle is for me was understanding the dissonance between what can be patient needs for spirituality versus physician motivation for medicine, and how those things can sometimes conflict. I grew up in a pretty traditional family, so throughout my life, my family has always kind of teetered between, traditional practices in healing versus medicine, and sometimes that caused conflict. And especially now in psychiatry too, a lot of cultures I've noticed when they see a patient with schizophrenia, perhaps, they don't understand that it always as an illness, and they sometimes equate it to possession by the devil. And the remedy for schizophrenia for them might not be medication, but to lean on towards spirituality and healing through religion, so on and so forth. And for me, the biggest struggle initially was just really understanding why we let patients go through these modalities when we, as physicians, might not understand it as being as effective. And we want to give them antipsychotics and other medication, other treatments. But going back to the whole holistic approach to medicine, I think what I learned is to really meet patients halfway and not allow them, but embrace their spiritual practices, because really it does play a big role in their recovery. How can someone fully recover from a disease if they don't feel fulfilled themselves? And regardless of what my beliefs are, what my understanding is, we owe it to patients to have those needs fulfilled.
So that's an excellent point. Thank you so much, Patrick. And last but not the least, Simran, do you want to share how, like any one situation where your practice, your research, or your study has threatened your understanding of spirituality?
I'm still very early on, but I'll say so far everything we've been learning has been very physiological based. Like you learn about the pathology, you learn about the illness, you learn about the disease, and then you learn about the pharmacotherapy or whatever therapeutics are out there. And it just makes me wonder sometimes, like, does everything need a medicine? Does everything have a medicine? So in that case, it seems a little contradictory towards any spiritual beliefs that I have underlying. I feel like not everything may need a medicine, but I think we are, as a whole, based on like guest lectures and what we're learning so far, I think we are moving away from that in medicine and also focusing on lifestyle choices and focusing on other determinants of health. But I think it's just one of the notion that I feel like there's a notion in public health and medicine that everything needs a causal factor, like which social determinant of health is particularly causing this. And I personally feel there may not always be a direct causal factor for everything.
Thank you, Simran. Thank you, each one of you panelists. That was some brilliant answers. It's really nice to hear from different perspectives, from different background. Thank you so much again. And I want to move on to Prajaya.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those answers were truly amazing. Yeah, it's like we don't really like, when we are faced with ethical issues, it's different to see someone or like see a TV show that highlights one, but I think it's completely different when we have to go through them, and especially in something like medicine, when when like these major ethical decisions are have to be dealt with. I think, yeah, it's truly amazing to learn from experienced practitioners and people in your medical career. So thank you so much for all your answers. So the next question we have is for our doctors, and so the first question would be, how do you maintain like empathetic boundaries with your patients and deal with emotional burnout? This is like this one issue that we're not really prepared to deal with, but we're forced to deal with in our medical career. So I'd love to hear it from our doctors. Would Dr. Dhunnoo would like to go first?
Sure. I've been asked that question by quite a few residents and students, and especially during COVID times, when you hear of doctors burnout quite a bit. And I think one has to differentiate between engaging with the patient and getting entangled. So there are two different. So you engage fully in trying to treat, advocate for your patient, but don't be entangled with it. So when you go home in the afternoon, you'll come back fully refreshed the next day. So for the students and younger residents in this group, just remember that. You can become fully engaged, but try not to be entangled. So when you're back to work the next day, you're advocating, you're doing everything you can, but again, don't get caught in the politics of things. I think Brinda was saying how you see the red tape or the policies that they throw at you, and you need to know the admin and the logistics. That's the side part. Don't make that the major part. It will be thrown on your lap during ward round. Fill in this form, get radiology, speak for vaccinations, but these are the sideline. This is not the real medicine, and you don't have to go to 7 years of medical school to fill in forms. So remember that all the time, and you'll have to do it because they expect you to do it, and unfortunately that's the kind of teaching we get, But remember, medicine is bigger than filling forms. So you advocate for your patient, you are there during the CPR, you are there putting as simple as an intravenous or as complicated as doing a procedure with your surgeon staff. That's where your learning part is. But then when you go back home at 5 o'clock, take care of yourself, as Dr. Patel and a few others have said, like take care of yourself, go and have fun and get to study in a proper environment. So engagement and being entangled, that's two different things.
Lovely answer. Thank you very much. Let's hear it from Dr. Patel.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Dr. Dhunnoo, I really resonate with what you were saying. And I was going to say something along the same lines, but I think first of all, as just kind of a general point to everyone, that the more you know yourself in terms of your strengths, your weaknesses, what your limitations are, as you develop that sensitivity, that's really going to help you navigate your interactions with others, specifically in this context, the questions referring to your patients. And I think once that awareness is there, that also helps with you then establishing boundaries. And when I say boundaries, I don't mean that you disconnect emotionally from people. It just means that you're honest with yourself and with others. One of the things that, just as a kind of a take home, at University of Toronto, where I teach the medical students and residents, we have a resilience curriculum. And one of the things that we talk about constantly with the medical student is that, how do you go through like challenges, in our day-to-day career? And one thing that we always emphasize is that just having a list of your values that are important to you, that you want to live by, those are going to be like what help anchor you, like in times when there's a storm. And if we haven't, really given those a lot of thought and trying as best as possible to align by them, then we're going to get pulled by so many other things. And I think it's that feeling of always being pulled that leads to that emotional burnout that we're talking about. So again, it really, for me, it's a lot about just knowing ourselves, being honest, and then trying to live by a set of principles that, will keep us healthy, but also happy.
Oh yeah, great to hear. Our character definitely plays a big role in our successes in our medical career. Thank you very much for highlighting that. For the sake of time, we're gonna move on to questions specifically for medical students and residents. So Asta, would you like to take over?
Yeah, for sure. All right, so for the sake of time, we can just have any of the med students just shout out the answer. Okay, so the question is, how did you overcome the stressful periods, and what are your motivators and mindsets during these times? And what sort of habits, processes, and techniques helped you face the challenges? So any of the med students, if you'd like to go.
I think one of the things that Dr. Dhunnoo spoke of about just making sure that, you have fun, that you're enjoying yourself, and you still get to be the person that you are, and you're not entirely consumed by medicine, I think is an important thing. And definitely that's something that I like to practice. There's also, I remember, I don't know if it's still going on, Simran, but there was also a elective on mindfulness that was done. And that has played a role for me in just understanding that, sometimes you need to take time and just clear your mind, relax, instead of always being overwhelmed. And I think the last thing is, it's okay to cry. It's fine. You could express emotion and stuff. And definitely there's a soft rule that, maybe you shouldn't do that in front of patients, but when you're in front of your peers, when you're with your preceptor, it's okay to let them know how you're feeling, and don't hold it in. Because I think like the thing that causes us sometimes to burn out the most is pretending like everything's okay. So sometimes acknowledging that, you are having some emotional turmoil, or you are tired, is an important part of dealing with burnout.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So any of the other med students, do you want to add on to that?
I can just quickly add on to Patrick. Like he was saying at the end, sometimes it's hard to pretend like everything is okay, but everything will also be okay. I know a lot of things, I remember, especially as a pre-med, everything just feels like the end of the world. It feels like you'll never get in, your dream will never come true, but it will. Just trust the process, it will happen. And also maybe find one thing that makes you feel better and always do it. Like I know for me, I was compromising on sleep for a long time. Like I would get like max 4 or 5 hours of sleep for weeks, and it was just draining me out. So sometimes you just have to understand the trade-off. Like if you're staying up for another 3 hours, are you really learning anything, or is it really better to sleep and have a half an hour of very efficient studying? And maybe it's going to the gym for you, or maybe it's whatever it is, maybe it's meditating, whatever it is, but really find time for that and take in the fact that sometimes what you're learning in an hour is not going to determine if you're going to get an A in the class or a B. So take the hour to do what you like to do.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right. Any of the other med students want to add on?
I agree with Simran. I think her point was what I was going to say. Just find one thing or two things that you can do every day to just stay, mentally healthy. If it's like working out, hanging out with friends, talking to your family, whatever it is, just make sure you do it every day. Don't break that habit.
All right. Brinda, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just echoing that. I think like it's important to not like you don't want to start resenting the journey that you're on if in terms of medicine. And I think if we deny ourselves doing those little things every day, it like builds up into this quiet resentment, and you want to enjoy the journey. So make like doing those things and controlling the things that you can control, I think really helps like keep the joy in what we're doing. Like for me personally, having a morning routine is something that like really like adds that joy. And like when I don't have it, I feel like all over the place. So, finding whatever it is for you and keeping to that is really important.
Simran, you're in foundations right now, right?
We just had our final on Friday.
Okay. So I think one tip that I learned when I was in first and second year is that is the most free time you're going to have for the rest of your life. So I know foundations was difficult. It does get better after foundations. It gets a lot better actually, but you're going to have to learn how to enjoy your next 2 years, and you have time to enjoy your next 2 years. So just don't forget to try to have fun and enjoy it.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing. And then now we can move on to Prajaya with the Q&As.
Yes. Yeah. So, it was very surprising to hear words like enjoying time, having fun in our, in our med school years. So something new that was, thank you very much for answering that question. So moving on to our most awaited part, we're going to open the panel for discussion with our audience. So for those who submitted the questions into the forum, thank you very much. We're going to try to go over all of them. So if anyone in the panel would like to answer this question, feel free to jump in. Some of the questions I see are directed directly to a specific member of the panel. So if in that case, we'll address them. Akanksha, would you like to read out the first question?
Yeah, for sure. So our first question here is a question specifically for practicing doctors, so Dr. Dhunnoo and Dr. Patel. Says, I want to be a doctor, but I'm terrified of death and dying. My biggest fear is making a fatal mistake or really hurting a patient as a doctor. So how do I deal with this fear? Yeah, so any insight that you two have, really appreciated. I guess I'll get started with Dr. Dhunnoo and then we'll move on to Dr. Patel.
All right, I have a quick thinking about this. So it's a good thing to be afraid of doing a fatal mistake. So the bottom line, don't. And if you do, or if you feel you're going to make a mistake, what we spoke about, all of us, is ask help, ask for help. So it's a completely different picture when you practice in a university hospital where you have 200 consultants behind you and residents and intensive care, and it's completely different when you practice in a small town. Interestingly, small town, they're more forgiving, and there are lots of old people in a small town, so the family expect that they've reached their end of life, right? While in the city, there's more young people that will have accidents and trauma and all kinds of stuff. So during your years of studentship and residency, you will come across death, and watch what your staff is doing. Watch what the nurses are doing. And then you learn what real compassion is. You cannot, I know we have classes on compassion, but it cannot be taught, but it can be experienced. So remember, these are important experiences to watch. So don't be afraid of it. Learn from others. And part of medicine, and a big part of medicine, is letting go. So, there's a saying, let go and let God. So remember that.
Thank you so much for that answer. Moving on to our next question. So this one's better suited for the students. So what are your study habits, and what was your undergrad, and how do you finance a medical degree? So any member of the panel can join in.
I think for study habits, not saying that this is my study habit, but the best study habit, one that is taught to us while we're in med school, is repetition. So in terms of what would best help you guys, if you guys wanted to make sure that you retain all the information, was to review what you learned the day of, and then to review several points throughout the month after to retain that knowledge. Obviously, procrastination isn't the best way to study. Other ways that I've seen other people study is using, I think it's called Anki cards, where they're able to test themselves. Those are used quite a bit. And another study tactic that I like is just to study in groups, because you help motivate each other, help bounce ideas off each other and fill in gaps of knowledge together. In terms of how you can finance a medical degree, I don't know how it is in the States. I imagine it's quite a task, but here in Alberta, you do have your student loans as well as your line of credit that you can get with banks. So student loans, if you haven't already used them for your undergrad, are available, which comes with grants that you don't have to pay off. During times of COVID, the government is giving you $9,000 in grants. But in terms of, for most people using a line of credit, banks usually give you about $300,000 over the course of your medical education to help pay for accommodations, food, travel expenses, as well as tuition as well. Obviously, you have to pay them back, but you don't have to until after you're done your education.
Yeah, I don't mind chiming in next. So what are your study habits? So I think, I'm assuming this is like from an undergrad student who's asking this question. So I think, my study habits changed between undergrad and medical school. And I think that's true for everyone. So my undergraduate major is biomedical engineering, and the way I studied was similar, but a little bit different to how I approached it in medical school. Engineering is very, math-based, physics-based. So you have to just do a lot of problems. And that's sort of how you learned. And I mean, I think it's similar to medicine. Medicine is a lot of, like Patrick mentioned, it's a lot of spaced repetition is like the strategy. So my advice would be just experiment with different learning styles. And I think Simran shared a link in the chat. And there's a lot of videos and resources online about medical education and how to make your studying process more efficient. I think a lot of us like waste times studying, and so there's some inefficient habits, rewriting your notes, stuff like that. And I'm not going to go too much into it because there's a lot of resources online that you could probably find on this sort of stuff. But my advice would just be do as many questions as you can for whatever you're studying for. If it's a bio exam, chemistry exam, your board exams, whatever it is. I think doing as many practice questions as you can is going to prepare you the best for the exams you need to take. So just be smart, talk to upperclassmen, whatever courses you're taking, and kind of take their advice.
If I may add something here, I get this question quite a bit from students and residents. So study techniques, basically each one of you have to learn what works for you. All right, so some are pictorial learners, some are visual learners, and some are textbook learners. So find out what works for you and adapt it to whatever subject you're doing. So medicine, there's lots of reading and lots of information from residents, staff. So you have to be able to pick up. One of the quick techniques I give students is pick up for every disease, you need to get 10 points. And there are certain points. So for incidence, pathology, symptom, signs, clinical features, pharmacotherapy, and then the last is new development, journals reading. So if you know everything about asthma in these 10 topics, that'd be great. So do your little notes and be active in studying, not just looking at a computer screen. So pen and paper, scribble, coffee in one hand, music loud. So be active about it. And remember, when you study, the first 25 minutes is what you will capture. After that, you'll think, oh, let's clean the table, right? So remember that, learn your own techniques and adapt it to whatever you're learning. And if you don't know, ask the staff, because staff loves intelligent questions. And staff hates it when they'll ask you a question, tell me about asthma, and your answer is, I don't know. Try something, and you'll surprise yourself how much you already know if you know 10 points about disease. And any one of you sitting here, if I say, tell me about cerebral palsy, you know a lot about it already. So trust yourself. Just make that 10 points your templates, and everything you study about any disease, that's your template. So know your routine. The other thing as well is, especially when it comes, Patrick, when it comes to senior student or resident, power naps, very important. Take your power naps. You're waiting for an x-ray, put your head down in the middle of the night. You're waiting for an x-ray report, put your head down for 5 minutes. Amazing what it does to you. So it's my little contribution to it.
I'm assuming the audience member has asked for the University of Alberta. The question is, do medical schools look at every single courses you've taken? So I think Patrick would be about to answer that question. Would you like to take over?
Yeah, for sure. In terms of admissions for the U of A, they don't look at every single course, but they look at most of the courses that you take. Essentially how it works is they will look at your performance while you're doing any sort of degree. So open studies doesn't count towards your GPA. It has to be some sort of program, whether it be a degree, after degree, or a master's. And what they do is they will drop your lowest year. So if you're doing a 4-year degree and you've completed it, and then you apply for medicine, and if every year has been a full year course load, then they will drop one of those years. If you're doing education past 5 years, and that you're taking longer to complete your degree, and some of your years might not be a full year course load, the year that you drop cannot be the only year that you did a full course load. So, but essentially that's how they look at your GPA. Yes, so pretty much every single course you've done, minus summer courses and open studies courses, is looked at, but they will drop the year that you have the lowest GPA in.
Just be mindful. There's different universities who do it differently. So everything that Patrick said applies to U of A, that they drop your lowest year, then to drop your spring courses. I know U of T, they drop your, I think like top 8 or top 10, depending on how many courses you've done. UBC doesn't drop any of your spring or summer courses. They look at everything. So just, yeah, just make sure to look at every university you're looking at. And I mean, US candidates can speak better to this, but from what I understand, they don't have a system where they drop any of the courses and they look at everything.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Right, thank you. Moving on. So what do you suggest about getting research experiences? And what was your experience with the MCAT? And once again, anyone in the panel can jump on in and answer this question.
So for getting research experience for me, I go back to what I said before. If you ask, you might get it. If you don't ask, you won't get it. And that's pretty much what you do for trying to get research experience. How I got my research experience, one was I went through a program such as honors physiology that gives you a little bit more opportunities. But past that, things that I've done is, walk around campus, going through all those areas where they are holding research and where all the labs are, and kind of canvassing and doing my own research on what each of these professors do and what projects they have ongoing, and see if any of them interest me. And then I will contact them directly with my resume. Sometimes they also post job listings on site if you search it up. But that's pretty much how it is. It's either through someone that you met through your program, through a cold walk-in and just handing in your resume and talking to them, or through a job application through a site. And then in terms of the MCAT, I believe it's a 7-hour exam still currently. For me, the MCAT is difficult because it relies on you to use a lot of logic and applying the knowledge that you've learned. In terms of what content it includes, it's all first year, second year undergrad sciences, or even high school kind of knowledge, but the questions are just harder, and it's a harder test environment because it's 7 hours. So my biggest suggestion for people who are looking to do the MCAT is do practice exams, because that's probably your best resource in understanding the MCAT and doing well on the MCAT. You can study for an entire year. You can study for the entire summer if you wanted. But one pattern I've noticed is that if you study past 2 months, you're not going to remember anything that you studied during that first couple of days or the first month that you studied. So don't get caught up by studying for an entire year for an MCAT. I only studied for a month, and then I did practice exams for 2 weeks, and then wrote the MCAT, and I did well. And everyone, most of the people who've kind of done that I've talked to have echoed the same thing, that you forget information so quickly. So don't get caught up with months and months of studying.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, at least on the research front, what Patrick was saying, that networking has so much to do with getting opportunities on the research front. And I will say that, especially with research, it sounds really simple, be a hustler. Some people will get lucky, but I will tell you, hustling always pays off in the end. And when it comes to research, just be a hustler and something will come up guaranteed. Just, ask as many people as you can, reach out to as many people you can. Something will open up because they're going to just see enthusiasm. And that's what people who are, they're looking for enthusiasm rather than, just your knowledge or your brightness, right? So just showing that enthusiasm and effort will make all the difference. The MCAT's changed since I've taken it, so I won't comment anymore.
Just to add on to the hustling thing, one thing as a undergrad student, your best tool is offering to volunteer in the lab, because it shows that you're hustling. you get to know the lab and the research, and they also get to know you, right? And it's free labor, so they're not going to say no to that.
I just want to studentify a little bit of what's being said about networking. I know sometimes, or I remember as an undergraduate student, I was very overwhelmed by networking. I thought that meant like you had to build friendships with professors, you have to build a really deep connection, have like 7 conversations with them before you can ask them for any sort of help or any sort of research. That's actually not true. Like Dr. Patel said, they really can identify your enthusiasm and genuine interest in their project. So even if you see someone once and you just ask them to chat for one meeting and then tell them you're interested, you would like to know more about their research, it does go a long way. Don't be overwhelmed by the word network.
Thank you for your answer. So moving on to our last few questions. So how competitive would the GPA be to get into medical school? Favorite question.
I can tell you what I have seen in my class from my classmates. From the classmates that I know, there's honestly a full range of GPAs from 3.3s to 4.0s, and same with the MCAT. There's a full range of scores from, I think the lowest person I know is a 505. I'm not sure, but not as high as you would think it is, and as high to like 522s. So honestly, do your best. Like try to get as high of a GPA as you can. Obviously, that's not to say that don't try. Same with the MCAT. Do your best. Try to get as high of a score as you can. But if your peer coming in with like a 3.5 GPA or 510 MCAT, do not think that you do not have a chance. I think it is true that they're moving away from those GPAs and MCATs. Really work on your application as a whole. Like try to really express your story in your application. Work on your extracurriculars. Work on your writings. Work on your interview. And I think you stand a decent chance with a decent GPA and
Yeah, one thing I like to tell pre-med students is that getting into medicine isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. In terms of if you can't, like having a high GPA is going to help you, but there's so many other aspects in your application that just having a GPA or just having a high GPA isn't going to guarantee you to get in either. You have to work on every aspect of your application, extracurricular, leadership, work, volunteering, how you present yourself in the writing, how you present yourself in the interview. And, you know, in terms of how you present yourself in an interview, the more experiences in life that you have, the better you perform in the interview because you gain so many different perspectives. So, something I like to tell students who are trying to get into medicine is that yes, GPA is important, but extracurriculars and getting out there and experiencing and getting those leadership opportunities is equally as important because it all comes together. It's one big application because they are looking for not just academics, but well-rounded doctors. And that comes with doing all these different things.
Thank you very much for your answer. So just for the audience, we have about 2 questions left, and then please stick around for the raffle. We're going to be announcing the winner after the discussion. So yeah, so one participant asked, how many credits in introductory physics is needed to get to medical school, or is it different for each medical school? Would anyone want to clarify?
I can quickly talk about this. I think McGill is 6 credits. U of A just has no requirements, and most medical schools in Canada are actually moving to that, where they have no course requirements. You can take pretty much any program you want and apply into medical school. But yeah, again, I think that's something you'll just have to look into the website of the specific school to see.
Thank you. And moving on to our last question. So it is Thanksgiving in the States, and in the spirit of gratitude, can you each tell us about one physician that has inspired you and has changed your practice of medicine for the better? Let's start with Dr. Dhunnoo first.
Yeah, for sure. There's a few, but the main one is one professor in the University of Cape Town, 30 years ago, Professor Kirsch, his style, his mannerism, his compassion has always impressed me and will always stay with me. And locally has been, and I'll say the name, the great pediatrician, Dr. Tedeshini, with his kindness. So it's always been, these are two people I always remember career-wise.
Thank you. And Dr. Patel?
Yeah, I had two physicians are coming to mind. They were my mentors when I was in residency doing my pediatrics, and Dr. Shah and Dr. Akhtar. What inspired me about both of them was not only were they great physicians, but they also had a lot of integrity and they were really good people. And you can look around, you'll see very successful physicians. They may be very good at what they do, but to have that human side where they also imbibe really good values and have great character is what inspired me. And that's what led them to help me also when I struggled during residency too. And so I'm very grateful for their support during that time.
Thank you very much. And Ravi?
Yeah, so one of my mentors right now, his name is Dr. Amit. He's so again, I'm like really, fresh in my career, but I mean, in terms of, why I really respect him and value him, I think that, he's a role model for how I'd want to be as a physician. He's very approachable. You wouldn't think, he doesn't really have that sense of like entitlement or something of like being a physician. He's a very down to earth type of person, very respectful. All the staff who work with him are, really like him. He's really creative. He, and he's just really, big on teaching, which I think is really important to me personally. So that's just something I'd like to emulate down the road.
Thank you. And Brinda?
I thought of one of my mentors, Dr. Alejandro. She's a pediatric PM&R, physical medicine and rehab doctor, and she's one of the deans of our medical school too. And I got to work with her for a couple of weeks, and I just loved the way she was able to connect with patients. And she would, in particular, do this thing where she'll, like on the examining table, she'll take down the the paper and like just draw out what's happening, with the pathology and what the procedure is on the on the paper of the examining table, and just like go that extra step to really make patients feel at ease. Yeah, so she's the one who came to mind.
Thank you. And Patrick, would you like to chime in?
For me, it would be Dr. Omar Farouk from Fort Saskatchewan Hospital. I'm very thankful for him. He kind of took me under his wing even before I got into med school with some research projects. But ever since I've gotten to med school, he's really played a large role in kind of mentoring me in subjects far beyond general surgery, kind of helping me with coping and getting through med schools and helping me kind of take a good look at what I want for my future. And he's just been a good guide through all of this.
Thank you. Simran?
Oh, my mentor was actually a doctor I met several years ago. It was my best friend's mom, actually, Dr. Shekufe. She was a gynecologist. And I think what inspired me so much about her was the amount of volunteer work she did. Like, she worked at 3 different clinics, but even on other times, she would provide consultations to so many mothers at cultural events, religious events, at the mosque, at other gatherings, like so many places. She was, I think you could tell from her behavior, her attitude as a doctor, that she was really in it for the service and for no other reason. So she will always inspire me.
Thank you very, very much for joining our med school event. This wouldn't have been possible without our panel's help and with all of our participants. So thank you very much for joining. I hope we all took something out of it. And thank you so much for the panel. All your questions were deeply insightful and very clarifying. Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.